Imagine the sun slipping below the horizon in Africa nearly 300,000 years ago. The light fades quickly, and with it disappears the greatest advantage your ancestors possessed: the ability to see danger coming. Beyond the glow of a small campfire, the grass ripples in the evening breeze. Somewhere in the darkness, a lion watches in silence. A leopard moves effortlessly through the trees. Hyenas laugh in the distance as they search for an easy meal, while a crocodile waits motionless beside the river where tomorrow's drinking water lies. Every shadow could hide a predator, and every journey beyond the safety of the group carries the risk of never returning. It is difficult to imagine such a world today. Most people live their entire lives without worrying about becoming another animal's prey. Cities, roads, and technology have pushed nature to the edges of our daily existence. But for almost every human who has ever lived, the opposite was true. The world was not built for us. It was ruled by creatures stronger, faster, and better armed than any human could ever hope to be. So how did we survive? How did a species with no claws, no fangs, no thick hide, and no remarkable speed manage to spread from a small corner of Africa to every continent on Earth? It seems almost impossible when you consider the monsters that shared our world. Yet the greatest threats were not always the predators most people imagine. Some of the deadliest encounters came from enormous herbivores, ambush hunters hidden in rivers, and giants that could kill without ever intending to hunt us. To answer that question, we have to step back into the Pleistocene, an age when humans were just one species struggling to survive among a remarkable collection of Ice Age giants. It was a world where every continent held its own terrifying rulers, and where each step our ancestors took toward conquering the planet was challenged by animals that had already mastered it. Africa was where humanity first learned that survival demanded far more than strength. Long before our ancestors ventured into Europe, Asia, or the Americas, they shared their homeland with an extraordinary concentration of predators unlike anywhere else on Earth. Even today, sub-Saharan Africa contains more surviving Pleistocene megafauna than any other continent. Lions, leopards, elephants, crocodiles, and hyenas are often thought of as icons of modern wildlife, but many of these animals had already dominated the landscape for well over 1 million years. When the first members of our own genus appeared, they entered a world where countless generations of hunters had already perfected the art of killing. For early humans, danger came from every direction. Lions patrolled the open grasslands in coordinated groups, capable of overpowering prey many times their own size. Leopards preferred solitude, slipping almost invisibly through trees and dense vegetation before launching devastating ambushes. Hyenas were more than scavengers. Armed with some of the strongest jaws among mammals, they were fearless predators in their own right and opportunists that rarely ignored an unprotected campsite. Near rivers, another threat waited with remarkable patience. Crocodiles could remain almost completely hidden beneath the water's surface before exploding upward with astonishing speed, turning an ordinary trip to collect water into a fatal mistake. Even the seemingly peaceful hippopotamus demanded constant caution. Despite feeding almost entirely on plants, its explosive aggression, enormous tusk-like teeth, and surprising speed made it one of the most dangerous animals in prehistoric Africa, just as it remains today. Against such opponents, humans seemed hopelessly unequipped. We lacked claws capable of tearing flesh, powerful jaws for defense, or the speed to outrun nearly any predator. Yet one of our simplest physical traits unexpectedly became an advantage. Walking upright made our ancestors appear much larger than they really were. Most predators instinctively weigh the risks of a confrontation, and an animal that suddenly stands tall, waves its arms, shouts, and advances confidently can appear far more dangerous than its actual size suggests. Combined with stones, sharpened wooden spears, and eventually controlled fire, this display often convinced predators that attacking simply was not worth the risk. None of these tools would have mattered without cooperation. A lone human was vulnerable, but a coordinated group could defend its young, guard a fresh kill, and drive even formidable predators away. Fire extended the day into the night, illuminating campsites and discouraging nocturnal hunters from approaching too closely. Intelligence allowed people to anticipate danger rather than merely react to it, transforming fragile individuals into communities capable of surviving in one of the planet's most dangerous environments. Even so, Africa still held predators that have almost vanished from popular memory. Among the most formidable was Homo better known as the scimitar cat. Roughly the size of a modern male lion, but armed with elongated blade-like canine teeth, this powerful hunter specialized in bringing down large prey across Africa and much of the Old World. For nearly the entire existence of Homo sapiens, it remained one of humanity's most intimidating rivals. Long before our ancestors became the dominant hunters of the planet, they lived in a land where they were only one competitor among many, and every successful day was another victory in an ancient struggle for survival. Leaving the African savannas behind did not mean escaping danger. As humans and Neanderthals expanded into Europe, they entered a landscape transformed by the Ice Age. Vast grasslands stretched across the continent, interrupted by dense forests, frozen rivers, and towering mountains. During the harshest winters, food became scarce, and every predator competed relentlessly for survival. It was a world where even finding shelter could place you face to face with one of the largest carnivores that ever lived. Among the most imposing was the cave bear. Standing up to 3.5 meters, or nearly 11.5 feet tall when rearing on its hind legs, and weighing as much as a metric ton, these giants dwarfed even the largest bears alive today. Despite their name, caves were not simply occasional resting places. They were essential shelters where cave bears hibernated for generations. Unfortunately for them, those same caves also attracted humans seeking refuge from Europe's brutal climate. The result was inevitable. Archaeology preserves remarkable evidence that these two species repeatedly occupied the same shelters, sometimes separated by only short periods of time. One discovery captures this relationship better than almost any other. A cave bear skull bearing a deep puncture wound appears to match the kind of injury inflicted by a human weapon. Whether it represents self-defense, competition for shelter, or an intentional hunt remains uncertain, but it tells us something extraordinary. Early humans and Neanderthals were not merely observing these enormous animals from a distance. At times, they confronted them directly, risking everything for access to the safest places in an unforgiving world. The dangers did not end at the cave entrance. Packs of wolves patrolled the open plains. Cave hyenas scavenged and hunted with crushing jaws, while leopards stalked silently through wooded valleys much as they still do today. Each predator occupied its own niche, forcing humans to understand not just one enemy, but an entire community of highly specialized hunters. Survival depended on recognizing tracks, predicting behavior, and avoiding unnecessary conflict whenever possible. Yet, perhaps the most fascinating predator of Ice Age Europe was the cave lion. Larger than modern lions, and among the biggest cats ever to roam the continent, these magnificent animals inspired something unexpected. Rather than depicting them as monsters, prehistoric artists painted them with astonishing realism on cave walls such as those at Chauvet. The careful attention to posture, movement, and anatomy suggests more than fear. It reflects deep observation and perhaps even admiration. These paintings reveal an important truth about both Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens. They did not simply endure a landscape filled with giants, they studied it, understood it, and found meaning within it. Their relationship with Europe's predators was not defined solely by conflict, but by respect, curiosity, and an intimate knowledge of the natural world. A way of thinking that would become one of humanity's greatest survival tools as the journey continued into even stranger lands. Europe taught early humans to survive freezing winters and powerful carnivores, but moving farther east opened the door to an even larger world. Eurasia was not simply one continent filled with familiar wildlife, it was a vast mosaic of grasslands, forests, mountains, and river systems stretching thousands of kilometers. Every new landscape introduced unfamiliar competitors, forcing migrating groups to adapt again and again. Yet despite these changes, one constant remained. Wherever humans went, they entered ecosystems that were already ruled by animals perfectly adapted to their environments. Among the most formidable predators were the great cats of Asia. Unlike Europe, where cave lions dominated much of the open landscape, Asia supported both lions and tigers, each representing a completely different approach to hunting. Lions relied on cooperation. Living in prides, they overwhelmed prey through coordinated attacks, using teamwork to bring down animals much larger than themselves. Tigers, on the other hand, perfected solitude. They disappeared into dense forests with astonishing stealth, relying on patience rather than numbers. A tiger could remain invisible until the very last moment before launching an explosive ambush. For early humans moving through forests and river valleys, this made them especially dangerous. You rarely saw a tiger before it saw you. The rivers presented another challenge. Along their banks lived Hexaprotodon civilensis, an extinct species of hippopotamus that shared many of the terrifying characteristics of its modern relatives. Although somewhat smaller than today's African hippos, fossil evidence suggests it possessed even more formidable teeth. Like modern hippos, it likely spent much of its day in the water before emerging to graze at night. Any human approaching a river to drink, fish, or cross risked provoking an animal capable of charging with astonishing speed. It serves as another reminder that the deadliest creatures were not always hunters. Sometimes the greatest danger came from simply standing in the wrong place. Asia may also have concealed one of prehistory's most surprising mysteries. For decades, dire wolves were believed to be unique to the Americas. Then, researchers described a fossil from China displaying more than a dozen anatomical features that appeared to match this famous Ice Age predator. The discovery remains controversial, and many paleontologists continue to debate its identification. Even so, the possibility is fascinating. If small populations of dire wolves truly reached Eastern Asia, then some of the first humans expanding across the continent may have encountered an unfamiliar predator that looked remarkably like the wolves they already knew, yet belonged to a completely different evolutionary lineage. As impressive as these predators were, they were overshadowed by an animal unlike anything alive today. Towering over the forests and floodplains of the Indian subcontinent was Paleoloxodon pneumaticus. This immense straight-tusked elephant is widely considered the largest land mammal to have lived since the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. The biggest individuals may have stood more than 5 meters, or 17 feet, at the shoulder, and weighed as much as 22 metric tons. Even if those upper estimates represent exceptional specimens, average adults would still have dwarfed every elephant alive today. Standing before such a giant must have been almost impossible to comprehend. A single footstep could shake the ground beneath your feet. Its tusks stretched several meters in length, while its massive body could crush trees simply by pushing through them. Unlike predators, it had no need to stalk or chase its victims. If startled, threatened, or protecting its young, sheer size alone transformed it into a force of nature. One swing of its trunk, one sideways shove, or one misplaced step could end a human life instantly. That is one of the great lessons hidden within the Ice Age world. We naturally fear the animals that hunt us, but the largest herbivores often demanded even greater respect. Predators usually weigh the risks before attacking because an injury can mean starvation. Giant herbivores have no such obligation. When something the size of Paleoloxodon pneumaticus decided to charge, there was rarely a fight to win, only a desperate attempt to survive. And as humanity continued its journey across the globe, an even stranger continent awaited, where evolution had produced monsters found nowhere else on Earth. This was Australia, a place that seemed to belong to another planet entirely. Around 60,000 years ago, as sea levels dropped during the Ice Age, early humans crossed into the vast landmass known as Sahul, which connected modern Australia and New Guinea. Unlike Africa or Eurasia, this was a continent whose wildlife had evolved in remarkable isolation for millions of years. Most of its animals had never encountered a human, or any other hominin before. They had no inherited fear of clever primates carrying fire and stone weapons. For our ancestors, it was a land of strange creatures unlike anything they had ever seen. For the animals, humanity was something entirely new. Among the most terrifying predators waiting in this unfamiliar world was quincana. Unlike modern crocodiles, which spend most of their lives in water, quincana was built for life on land. Long, powerful legs allowed it to move with surprising speed, while its blade-like serrated teeth were designed for slicing flesh rather than simply gripping prey. Although much about this ancient reptile remains uncertain because of its fragmentary fossil record, there is little doubt that it occupied the role of an apex predator. Imagine walking through dense woodland only to realize that the crocodile hunting you wasn't hiding in a river. It was running across the forest floor. As frightening as that sounds, another reptile may have been even more intimidating. Megalania, The largest lizard known to have existed was essentially an enormous relative of today's Komodo dragon. Conservative estimates suggest it stretched over 16 feet in length, while the largest individuals may have approached 26 feet and weighed well over a ton. Like modern monitor lizards, it likely possessed razor-sharp teeth, immense strength, and venom that weakened prey after a bite. Its low body would have allowed it to disappear into vegetation before launching a devastating attack. Even experienced hunters would have struggled against an animal of that size. Australia's mammals were no less extraordinary. Thylacoleo, often called the marsupial lion, was unlike any predator alive today. Despite descending from herbivorous ancestors, evolution transformed it into one of the most specialized mammalian carnivores ever discovered. Equipped with massive cutting premolars instead of typical canine teeth and possessing the strongest bite relative to body size of any known mammal, it was perfectly adapted for dispatching large prey. It looked familiar enough to remind you of a big cat, yet every detail of its anatomy revealed a completely different evolutionary path. Perhaps the greatest mystery is why so many of these remarkable animals disappeared so soon after humans arrived. Their extinction remains one of the most debated questions in prehistoric science. Some researchers argue that even relatively small human populations, armed with fire and efficient hunting strategies, placed too much pressure on slow-breeding megafauna. Others point to a rapidly changing climate that was already reshaping Australia's ecosystems before people appeared. The most likely explanation may involve both forces acting together. Whatever the cause, within only a few thousand years, many of Australia's giants had vanished forever. Humanity had entered another continent ruled by monsters, and before long, that extraordinary world began to disappear, leaving only fragments for us to piece together today. While Australia's giants were disappearing, another untouched world still waited beyond the northern horizon. During the Ice Age, lower sea levels exposed a vast stretch of land known as Beringia, connecting Siberia and Alaska. Over countless generations, small groups of humans crossed this frozen bridge without realizing they were entering an entirely new continent. Ahead of them lay the Americas, a land where mammoths still roamed. Enormous predators ruled the plains, and ecosystems had developed in relative isolation for hundreds of thousands of years. Far from arriving after this prehistoric world had vanished, we now know that humans became part of it for thousands of years, living alongside some of the most extraordinary animals evolution had ever produced. Among the first giants they may have encountered was the North American short-faced bear. Standing up to nearly 12 feet tall on its hind legs and weighing well over a metric ton, it was even larger than today's polar and Kodiak bears. Although scientists continue to debate exactly how it lived, whether it actively hunted large prey or often displaced other predators from their kills, its sheer size alone would have made every encounter intimidating. An animal capable of looking directly into the branches of a tree while standing upright needed little encouragement to command respect. Yet, even this colossal bear shared its world with another legendary predator. Smilodon, the famous saber-toothed cat, stalked the grasslands and forests of the Americas for hundreds of thousands of years. Its enormous canine teeth, some reaching nearly 12 inches in length, remain among the most recognizable weapons in natural history. Unlike modern big cats that rely heavily on suffocating bites, Smilodon is thought to have pinned struggling prey beneath its immensely powerful forelimbs before delivering a carefully placed strike with its saber-like teeth. For early humans, simply seeing one emerge from the tall grass would have been unforgettable. The Americas were also home to dire wolves, animals that looked remarkably similar to modern wolves but belonged to a completely separate evolutionary lineage. Larger and more heavily built than gray wolves, they likely hunted in coordinated packs capable of bringing down enormous Ice Age herbivores. Sharing the same open landscapes was another familiar-looking hunter with an unexpected identity, the American cheetah. Despite its name, it was not a true cheetah at all, but a close relative of the mountain lion that independently evolved a sleek, long-legged body for pursuing fast-moving prey. Evolution had reached a similar solution on two different continents, creating another striking example of convergent evolution. Towering above many of these predators was the American lion, one of the largest cats ever to exist. Larger than modern African lions and built for hunting the continent's abundant megafauna, it represented yet another challenge for newly arrived humans adapting to an unfamiliar landscape. But perhaps the most astonishing animals were not predators at all. giant ground sloths, some weighing several tons, wandered slowly through forests and open woodlands. Armed with enormous claws and capable of rearing onto their hind legs, they were gentle plant eaters for much of their lives. Yet they possessed more than enough strength to defend themselves against almost any threat. Remarkably, these encounters may not exist only in our imagination. In South America, ancient rock art appears to depict groups of humans confronting a giant sloth, possibly portraying one of the countless interactions between people and Ice Age megafauna. Whether the scene records a hunt, a defensive encounter, or a story passed through generations, it reminds us that these animals were not mythical creatures. They were neighbors. For thousands of years, humans did not simply pass through the Americas. They became another species within its complex web of life. They hunted, competed, adapted, and learned from the continent's extraordinary wildlife, just as they had in Africa, Europe, Asia, and Australia. By the time the last great Ice Age kingdoms faded, humanity had survived every predator the planet could offer, and in doing so, had quietly become the most adaptable animal of them all. From the predator-filled plains of Africa to the frozen valleys of Europe, from the forests of Asia to the isolated wilderness of Australia, and the vast Ice Age kingdoms of the Americas, one pattern emerges again and again. Every continent challenged humanity with animals that were stronger, faster, heavier, or better armed than we were. Lions hunted in coordinated prides. Tigers disappeared into the forest before striking. Bears claimed caves, crocodiles ruled rivers, giant reptiles dominated Australia, and saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, and enormous lions patrolled the New World. Wherever humans arrived, nature already had an apex predator waiting, yet none of them stopped us. That is perhaps the most extraordinary story hidden within human evolution. We did not inherit the claws of a lion, the speed of a cheetah, or the armor of a rhinoceros. We could not overpower mammoths or outrun wolves. Individually, we were among the most vulnerable large mammals on Earth. What we possessed instead was something evolution had never assembled in quite the same way before. We learned to think beyond the present moment. We shared knowledge between generations instead of letting every individual begin from nothing. We cooperated in groups large enough to solve problems no single person could face alone. We shaped stone into weapons, mastered fire, developed language, planned hunts, warned each other of danger, and gradually transformed experience into culture. Every generation inherited not only genes, but the survival lessons of those who came before. That was humanity's greatest adaptation. The modern world often shields us from the dangers that shaped our ancestors, making it easy to forget the environment that built the human mind. But for hundreds of thousands of years, every trip to a river carried the risk of crocodiles. Every hunt could end with predators claiming the prize. Every sunset marked the beginning of another night surrounded by unseen eyes in the darkness. The greatest survivor in Earth's recent history was never the strongest animal on the planet. It was the one that learned, adapted, and faced a world that wanted it dead, together.